Neoliberalism promised the Philippines efficiency, prosperity, and modernization. Instead, it delivered debt, deindustrialization, expensive utilities, stagnant wages, and 40 years of economic mediocrity. Today, the evidence is undeniable. Neoliberalism didn't just fail, it crippled our capacity to grow. In 1986, the EDSA People Power Revolution ousted the Marcos dictatorship and restored formal democracy. Hopes were high that political freedom would bring broad-based development. However, this transition coincided with the rise of neoliberalism globally, and successive Philippine administrations from Corazon Aquino onward embraced free market prescriptions. The new government immediately faced the debt and economic crisis inherited from Marcos. Under pressure from the IMF and World Bank, President Corazon Aquino made repaying foreign debt the top priority, even at the expense of public investment. Aquino institutionalized automatic debt servicing. Every year, the budget paid creditors first, public services last. From 1986 to 1993, the Philippines bled approximately 8 to 10% of its GDP annually just to pay debt. Almost $30 billion evaporated. And ironically, the total external debt continued to grow. Growth barely hit 1% a year, while our neighbors were hitting 6, 8, even 10%. Thailand and Malaysia leapfrogged forward. The Philippines stagnated. Japanese investors who poured money into Southeast Asia's tiger economies shunned the Philippines. Between 1987 and 1991, Thailand received 15 times more Japanese Asian investment, $24 billion, than the Philippines, $1.6 billion. As one study noted, domestic austerity plus debt repayment created a depressed economy that foreign capital simply avoided. Why did the new democratic leadership adopt this path? Partly, neoliberal ideas had gained sway among Filipino technocrats. Influential economists in academia and government, some trained during the Reagan-Thatcher era, argued that free markets and privatization were the cure to the crony capitalism of Marcos. With few alternative models on the table as the left's nationalist industrialization plans were marginalized during the anti-Marcos struggle, neoliberalism triumphed by default in the late 1980s. The US government's influence also loomed large. Washington strongly pushed Aquino to honor debts and liberalize the economy as conditions for aid. Thus, from the outset, the post-Marcos EDSA Republic bore birthmarks of elite-led, externally influenced economic policy. Fidel Ramos took neoliberal restructuring to its peak. Tariffs slashed to 3 to 5%. Capital controls dismantled, full convertibility of the peso, foreign banks given wide entry. The Philippines joined the World Trade Organization in 1995 and bound itself to liberalization commitments we could never reverse. Our neighbors did not do this recklessly. In fact, countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia maintained higher trade protection and active industrial policies during this period, which helped their industries grow. Indonesia had state firms composing roughly 30% of GDP. Thailand put 33% of its budget into capital investment. We cut ours down to 16%. And what did we get? Industries died. Agriculture collapsed. Local factories shut down. Even a finance secretary from that era later admitted, tariff reform killed so many local industries. Ramos promised a newly industrialized country status by the year 2000. What we got was capital flight. And when the 1997 Asian financial crisis hit, $4.6 billion of speculative money fled within weeks. The peso crashed, manufacturing declined, and by 1998, the country was in recession. By the late 1990s, the Philippines, once a rice exporter, had become a net food importing country as cheap imports flooded in after WTO accession. Crucially, unlike in other countries, even lower consumer prices couldn't be touted as a success because poverty remained stubbornly high. About 1/3 of Filipinos were poor through the 1990s. Estrada and Arroyo kept the system intact. Ipira carved up the power sector and turned it over to private hands. The promise? Lower electricity bills. The result? The Philippines ended up with one of the highest residential electricity rates in Asia within a decade. Filipino households paid first world prices for third world service. Take-or-pay clauses, universal charges, pass-through costs, everything engineered to guarantee profit. The same pattern happened with water. The Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewerage System, or MWSS privatization, in 1997 stands as one of the largest water privatization experiments on Earth. Manila was split in two, given to concessionaires. Rates skyrocketed. Obligations failed. Infrastructure lagged. One concessionaire even went bankrupt and walked away, forcing government to take over while still being sued by the foreign partner. This wasn't competition. It was private monopolization of a public good. Transport, privatized tollways, privatized rail, privatized ports, all built for profit, not people. High user fees became the norm. Basic infrastructure was no longer a public good. It became a product sold back to Filipinos. Education? Starved. Teachers left. Private colleges dominated. Primary school completion stagnated. Healthcare? Barely funded. Only around 3 to 4% of the national budget. Private hospitals boomed. The poor were priced out. The system became de facto privatized through neglect. Neoliberalism is not simply an economic theory. It is a system of abandonment. Noynoy Aquino's years are often praised for 6% GDP growth, but poverty remained around 25% in 2015, almost the same level as in 2003. The poor got CCT cash transfers, but those barely dented structural poverty. 1 in 5 Filipinos remained in precarious employment. Underemployment and informal work became the economy's safety valve. And as always, when the system couldn't create jobs, the state exported its most valuable commodity, its people. Millions of Filipinos migrated. Remittances became the structural pillar of the economy, 10% of GDP. Call centers added another 8 to 10%. It made consumption grow, but consumption is not development. It is a sedative. Duterte came to power driven by the anger of a population that had already been betrayed repeatedly by neoliberal technocrats. He was the first president since EDSA who openly challenged the political class that worshipped Western markets and treated Filipino national development as an afterthought. Duterte did not speak in the polite neoliberal language. He spoke in the language of sovereignty, protection, order, and national dignity. He went after abusive telecom monopolies and forced them to accelerate improvements. He confronted the energy cartels, even if ultimately the legal frameworks and privatized structures remained intact. He demanded lower barriers to service delivery and forced elites to concede ground. These gestures mattered because they shattered the illusion that the oligarchs were untouchable. For decades, presidents negotiated with them. Duterte coerced them. On foreign policy, he defied Washington. Every president before him acted like the Philippines was a client state of the United States. Duterte rejected that posture and pivoted to Asia, especially China. It wasn't ideological, it was strategic. Infrastructure financing, connectivity, industrial cooperation, and non-interference. In a multipolar world, Duterte understood that aligning with the United States meant perpetual subordination, while engaging China meant negotiating as equals in an Asian regional architecture. But economically, Duterte was still operating in a system that had been structurally neoliberalized since the late 1980s. The state was hollowed out, public utilities privatized, key sectors bound by multilateral agreements. The bureaucracy internalized neoliberal dogma for 30 years. He could not simply flip a switch and nationalize the economy, not without triggering financial shock, sabotage, or elite revolt. That is the paradox of Duterte, politically anti-establishment, but economically constrained by a system designed to neutralize any attempt at true economic sovereignty. He challenged the oligarchs, but the laws, agreements, and institutions he inherited were written for them. Still, his presidency was a turning point. He broke the taboo of questioning the privatization consensus. He forced water concessionaires to renegotiate. He publicly exposed how Manila's utilities exploit consumers. He normalized an idea that had been unthinkable under the liberal elite, that the state has the right and sometimes the obligation to intervene. Filipinos are told to look at GDP growth. The correct metric is development. Here is the true record. Poverty stuck at 25 to 30% for decades. Inequality worsening, one of the highest in East Asia. Manufacturing shrunk from about 30% of GDP in the 1970s to around 20% in recent decades. Millions forced abroad to feed their families. A service economy that imports nearly everything it consumes. We grew, but didn't advance. We became bigger, but not stronger. We integrated into the world economy, not as an equal, but as a supplier of cheap labor and raw materials. That is the essence of neoliberalism. "40 years of evidence tell a single story. Neoliberalism did not deliver for the Filipino people. It benefited a narrow elite, foreign corporations, and a bureaucratic class that internalized the doctrines of its foreign creditors. A country that cannot control its electricity, water, food supply, education, healthcare, and industrial base is not sovereign. A country that lives off remittances and imports everything is not open. It is hollow. The Philippines needs an economic model that prioritizes nation building, state-led industrial policy, protection of strategic sectors, real agricultural support, public control of utilities, investment in people, not creditors, domestic value creation, not labor export. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We only need to reclaim the one we abandoned. Neoliberalism promised the Philippines prosperity, What it delivered was fragility, dependency, and lost decades. The choice now is straightforward. Either we keep pretending the model worked, or we finally admit that it didn't, and start building an economy designed not for creditors, but for Filipinos. Thank you for watching. If you want to stay connected, you can follow me on my social media pages. And if this kind of work resonates with you and you want to support it, you can do that through Buy Me a Coffee at buymeacoffee.com/janwriter or through Gcash using the QR code at tiny.cc/janwriter. Your support genuinely keeps independent writing alive. And if you found this video useful, consider subscribing to the channel. Like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need clarity on this topic. Every bit of engagement keeps this space alive, so I can keep talking to you directly. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.